All right, today we're diving into the pretty wild story of how Google almost didn't happen. We're going to look at that and the future of AI through the eyes of co-founder Sergey Brin, based on a fascinating talk he recently gave back at Stanford. So let's just kick things off with a fact that is kind of mind-blowing. One of the guys who literally built the internet as we know it never actually finished his PhD. Yep, he is technically still on a leave of absence from Stanford. And that little detail, it perfectly sets the stage for this whole story, which is really less about some grand master plan and way more about curiosity, a ton of luck, and, a little bit of mischief. To really get the Google origin story, you have to picture what Stanford was like in the mid-1990s. Brin talks about it as this time of incredible creative freedom. It was a true academic sandbox where the goal wasn't to build a company, but just to mess around and see what was even possible. He wasn't even focused on web search at first. And what's really interesting is one of his first passion projects was writing code to try and digitally put shredded documents back together. It never really worked, but his advisors just gave him the freedom to go for it. And get this freedom wasn't just in the digital world. He actually learned how to pick physical locks. He tells this amazing story about a new computer science building with all these high-tech electronic keys. So the one place he could get in? The balcony of the room with a computer that made the master keys. So he climbs across scaffolding, picks the physical lock on the balcony, and just makes himself a master key. Unbelievable. And this is a perfect example of that experimental spirit. Long before DoorDash or anything like it, he built a website so you could order a pizza online. The site would then automatically send a fax to the pizza place. The fatal flaw in this brilliant plan? He very quickly realized that restaurants almost never checked their fax machines. It was a total bust. But it just goes to show how early he was thinking about all this stuff. So you've got these random experiments. How do you get from there to a company like Google? Well, here's the surprising answer. They didn't want to. For them, entrepreneurship was actually the last resort. Okay, so the big breakthrough, of course, came when he finally teamed up with Larry Page. While Brin was playing with data mining, Page was obsessed with the link structure of the web. And together, they came up with PageRank, this revolutionary idea that basically treated a link from one page to another as a vote of confidence. It completely changed the game for finding relevant information online. But even with this incredible technology, their mindset was still totally academic. I mean, they were grad students, right? They weren't thinking about building some global empire. Their very first move was to try and sell it. They went and pitched it to all the big internet companies at the time, like Excite. So they sent an email to this venture capitalist, Vinod Khosla, who was trying to get Excite to buy their tech. And they threw out a number that, for two PhD students, was just an insane fortune, $1.6 million. And just 15 minutes later, 15 minutes, an email hits their inbox. It says, "Oh, that's a lot of moolah, but okay." They were over the moon. They thought they had a deal, they had made it. But it was all a joke. A friend had faked the reply as a prank. The real deal completely fell apart. So with no buyers and their licensing dreams totally crushed, starting their own company was literally the only option they had left. Google was basically born out of necessity. Okay, so once they were pretty much forced to start a company, how in the world did they build a culture that could not only launch a world-changing product, but keep innovating for more than 2 decades? Well, according to Brin, it really started with Larry Page's just relentless, almost insane ambition. It wasn't just about thinking big, it was a core philosophy. Brin said if you suggested a plan to, say, digitize all the books in the world, Larry would ask why you weren't also digitizing every single street on the planet. And that mindset, taking on problems that everyone else thought were impossible, that became the engine of the whole company. That kind of galactic ambition led to their mission to organize all the world's information. But it also meant you had to be willing to fail, and fail really publicly. And there's no better example of that than Google Glass, which was a huge swing for the fences that, well, it ultimately struck out with consumers. And what's so revealing is hearing Brin reflect on it. He pretty much admits he jumped the gun on Glass, thinking he was going to have this big Steve Jobs moment. The lesson he learned was that you have to let an idea really bake and become a solid product before all the hype and expectations just snowball out of control. So that brings us to today and the AI race. Learning to recover from a public stumble like LastPass is one thing. But what happens when you almost miss the next huge revolution entirely, even when you helped invent it? Because despite being a pioneer, Google suddenly found itself playing catch-up. And Brin is brutally honest about this. He says Google, for sure, messed up by not seeing the explosive potential of its own research, specifically the transformer architecture. I mean, that's the foundational tech that lets an AI understand context in language. They published the paper that started it all, but they were just too cautious about turning it into a product, and other companies jumped on the opportunity. But here's the key. While they might have been slow to get a product out the door, they had spent over a decade building this incredibly powerful foundation. They had the core research from groups like Google Brain, they designed their own custom AI chips, and they had this deep bench of world-class talent. All the pieces were there, just waiting to be put together. Looking forward, Brin doesn't really see AI through this lens of doom and gloom. He actually sees it as the ultimate tool for empowerment. It's a way to give every single person an expert on any topic imaginable, a partner to brainstorm with, and a way to just augment our own capabilities, not replace them. So, what does this radically empowered future actually mean for our society? Well, in the end, Brin turns his disruptive thinking toward one of our oldest institutions, the university itself. He poses this really fundamental challenge. If expert-level knowledge is instantly available through an AI on your phone, and if technology is constantly reshaping the job market, what is the point of a centralized, physical campus that you go to for 4 years? It's a direct question to the very institution that gave him the freedom to create Google in the first place. And this really brings the whole thing full circle. That same spirit of playful curiosity that led him to picking locks and faxing pizza orders is now questioning the very foundations of how we learn. It suggests that maybe the most profound impact of AI won't be in the code we write, but in the institutions we're going to have to completely reinvent. And it leaves us with the ultimate question. In a world being reshaped by this technology, what does a university or really any institution built on knowledge even look like a century from now?